So, good evening. My name is Shabbir Hussain Mustafa, and I'm a curator at the National Gallery, Singapore. And I'm currently in Berlin as a guest of the TAD. And so thank you to HKW, to Hyunjin, Ansem, David, and Bernard for having me today. Years ago, my wife Lila and I were in Penang Island, Malaysia. We were visiting not in the hope of research, but in the pursuit of lingering, something we do, eating, lounging, sometimes talking to those we meet along the way. We call this personal project of ours a comfortable life, a sort of toolbox or coping mechanism for living in deep capitalism, as we apply layer upon layer of the colonial, urban, and the non-conscious in Southeast Asia to our everyday lives. Penang Island, along with Singapore Island and the historical port of Malacca, is also a place that used to form part of the Strait Settlements, a group of British territories located along the Malay Peninsula, consolidated by the British East India Company in the early part of the 19th century. Whilst both Penang and Singapore Islands form critical nodes within the British colonial public sphere beyond India, Penang Island today is a little less central to national politics, with much of post-colonial Malaysia's political power being consolidated in Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore, of course, became an independent nation-state since 1965. Yet Penang endures, from a cosmopolitan population to a decadent historic city center that received UNESCO World Heritage status in 2008, which in turn led to a tourism boom and the gentrification of heritage. Penang today, I suppose, is a far cry from its colonial heyday, or even its laid-back, dopey self of the 1960s, when it was a major stop on the hippie trail in Southeast Asia. There is even a 4-kilometer stretch of beach that bears the marks of the colonial and the counterculture past together. Batu Fringi, crudely translated from Malay as the white man's rock, or where the Westerners came ashore. During this particular visit to Penang, however, we were eating Laksa, a dish consisting of rice noodles with prawn or fish, served in spicy soup based on sour tamarind. It's a common dish prepared in coffee shops, a bazaar where all sorts of tastes converge, offering smells for the discerning urbanite, migrant worker, senior citizen, and middle classes alike. As it happens at this sort of places, seating is always limited, and often one sits where one can. On this day, we happened to share a circular 8-seat table with an elderly gentleman. He appeared to be from the professional working class, a regular to the coffee shop, and seemed to operate with no sense of urgency. In my view, much of gastronomy ought to be about lingering, or as the writer Michael Ondaatje says, waiting for the revealing of some small anecdote or piece of gossip, or to witness a remarkable accidental gesture. Looking around, I also noticed another species, the Felis Catus, or the domestic cat. This sort of sighting of the Felis Catus is not peculiar to Penang, but is common across peninsular Malaysia's urban centers, where one encounters the omnipresent beings lingering. Nobody throws scraps at them, except, of course, for the odd tourists. Feeding is allowed, but only after the humans have had their fill. The cats have their own sense of time, routines, social dynamics. To the coffee shop's Homo sapien visitor, the cats lounge, exchange whiskers, carry on with their own version of the comfortable life. It is said the elderly Felis Catus sleeps for up to 16 hours a day in the tropics. It is not known how many cats there are in peninsular Malaysia today, but if I was to venture a non-scientific guess, I would put them in the many millions. Anyway, halfway through our Laksa, my eyes begin to wander. I observed the gentleman across the table as he ate. He sipped coffee and sometimes bent over to pat the cats. The proximity, shared public space, made me bolder than usual, as I remarked. There are so many cats in Penang. It's truly amazing how many cats there are in Penang. To this, the gentleman offered no immediate response, maybe a sort of a reticent acknowledgement, a reluctant smile. A few moments later, as if having considered my query more deeply, he murmured, "Memory purba, memory purba," repeating it twice for emphasis. I requested for some clarification immediately, because memory purba in Malay means ancient memory. And so the cat was ancient memory? If so, how? How could cats be ancient memory? To this, he said something that is forever inscribed in my mind. The cat is Kramat, like how the harimau was Kramat when I was younger. If memory purba means ancient memory, Kramat often refers to sacred places, things, or people. And the harimau is tiger. So I repeat, the cat is Kramat, like how the tiger was Kramat when I was younger. Recalling the gentleman's remarks got me thinking, had the domestic cat become the plenipotentiary of an ancient memory of the tiger that once roamed the jungles of the Malay Peninsula? With the jungles and tigers nearly gone in the pursuit of the world's largest palm oil plantations, was the Felis Catus a sort of coping mechanism, a schizophrenia of deep capitalism? Had we finally arrived at the ultimate threshold of the comfortable life? The optimist in me refuses to acknowledge this condition as a pathological one, but a productive process, perhaps demanding creative connections. Were these urban felines then cuddly bearers of the Anthropocene? A moment when tiger becomes cat, cat becomes Kramat, jungle becomes palm, palm becomes Oasis. And what about the gentleman's use of the word Kramat? Kramats, I am told, usually appear and talk in a dream. I'm also told that a Kramat never dies. Not really. The Kramat is the ability to exist effusively between the real and the other. Searching, we find that Kramats are not just sacred spaces or shrines in the Malay world, but also beings, objects, mountains, rivers, mist, crocodiles, tigers, vertigers, even the abode and action or actions of artists and thinkers. There is a piece of paper that the Malaysian artist and poet Latif Mohideen shared with me recently. It is an unpublished text he found in his files, authored by his friend, provocative genius, the brilliant writer Saleh bin Jonet. Oasis. In Latif's terrace house in Lembah Kramat, there are many marvelous alcoves and arches. Even the TV there is no common TV. Bats and butterflies dance out of the box. A train is always arriving in his backyard. The strumming of a gypsy strikes the suburb out. Webs of light quiver lightly in the corners. Tigers prance. Colors roar in the corridors. and white horses winged and wanton whirl in the dark secret attic of his world. Amidst the dull labyrinth of this desert, he creates his own oasis of the sacred, holding on the clue, the gift of Aryand. He paints his way towards epiphanies. Signed, Saleh bin Jouned, KL, Kuala Lumpur, about 1986. To Saleh bin Jouned's evocation of the Kramat, I must recall the anecdote of another Saleh, recorded by the scholar bureaucrat of colonial Malaya, Richard Olaf Winstead, in the early 1920s in the state of Johor, a place close to Singapore Island. Times have changed, Saleh continued. The village teacher tells my children not to believe in ghosts, but a Kramat is a holy place, or a person, or an animal with an Arabic name. And a Kramat is not afraid of railway trains and motor cars. It is not so very long ago that an old Haji heard fellow villagers whisper how his idler and good-for-nothing son, Long, was not his son at all. He was very angry, and his wife was even angrier. There was a lot of trouble, you see. So the village headman said, "We will climb One Tree Hill and consult Green Turban. But sir, a Muslim jinn, or spirit, will have no pity for a faithless wife." Half the village climbed One Tree Hill that day, but the only one who fainted and failed to reach the top was a good-for-nothing Long. And sir, I forgot to explain that Green Turban is always accompanied by another Kramat, a word tiger. If an epidemic is to move towards us, or another tiger tries to enter the district, the word tiger wanders around for 3 nights roaring. The trespasser often falls into a deep slumber. Leaving the 2 or 3 anecdotal yet entirely modern tigers aside for the moment, I have the pleasure and honor of introducing 2 individuals who have developed profound formulations of the metaphorical and material tiger within a Singapore, Malayan, Southeast Asian, and global consciousness. Let's begin with Kevin Chua. Kevin is Associate Professor of the 18th and 19th century European and Southeast Asian art at Texas Tech University. He obtained his PhD in the history of art from the University of California at Berkeley. His 18th century research concerns how French painting was forced to reckon with the changed ground brought forth by medical vitalism. And his Southeast Asian research involves the mystical and animist underpinnings of modernity and the recursions of colonialism in the global contemporary. Connected to much of Kevin's genealogical work, and I mean this in a Foucauldian sense, is a provocative essay he authored for the 2007 issue of Focus, or Forum on Contemporary Art and Society, titled Regional Animalities. Edited as a series of journal-style publications by the scholar and artist Lucy Davis, the issue on animalities was seminal, as it grappled with ways in which human, animal places, spaces, ecologies, and exchanges are imagined, represented, and performed in a range of historic and contemporary contexts in Southeast Asia. Interestingly, David Tay, who is one of the curators of the program here, was also a contributor. He was talking about dogs in Thailand. So we must ask him later what he meant by it. Titled The Tiger and the Theodolite, George Coleman's Dream of Extinction, Kevin systematically unpacked the now significant, but perhaps at the time taken for granted 19th century print by the German engraver Heinrich Leutmann. In his essay, Kevin argued, the relevance of the tiger here is less in its obvious appeal as a metaphor of an economic powerhouse than in its continuing and peculiar status as a boundary creature. The essay, like the one that I'm about to describe, the next one, would prove seminal. In the same issue of Focus was Nyen, artist, thinker, frequent flyer, and I would say occasional shaman, with an exquisitely crafted text titled, "Every Cat in History is I," where he argues for a reconsideration. The beast itself is a creature of fantastical or nightmarish proportions, wrote Nyen. A hallucinatory apparition, red-bodied, black-headed, white-breasted, and bigger than a male goat, close quote. The tiger, it could be said, is a myriad of forms, pertinent as source, observable as simultaneous appearance, disappearance, indicative even of an ideological interstice. Nowadays, we don't use the word ideology. It's become a bad word, I think. That border being, where consciousness is tested, but could also be re-established in a radically altered form. It's truly amazing that we have both these gentlemen with us today. And so my own role will be to sort of moderate, facilitate, to ensure there is sort of some flow in the discussion. And so we'll approach the next hour or so as free-flowing discussion, largely between Kevin and Nyen, moving from topicalities to concerns and problematics firmly grounded within modes of working that Nyen's practice occupies. So perhaps let me offer the first prompt to my fellow panelists. The common marker that you have both unraveled is the 1865 print by Heinrich Leutmann. Recently, in collaboration with my colleague Melinda Susanto, we undertook some what we call trivia research. Could we establish with certainty if Coleman's road surveying party did in fact meet with a tiger in 1835? Consulting all the possible sources we could find, and we think we didn't leave any stone unturned, we found nothing. So 2 questions. How did you both arrive at the tiger in 2007? It's been a decade now. And is the tiger really Kramat? So please join me in welcoming Kevin, Chua, and Hussain.
So how I came upon this image in 2007, I noticed it in this book, big coffee table book on Singapore. No one had written about it. It seemed really fascinating and mysterious. My one confirmation that it actually happened, the Coleman tiger attack in 1835, is in this book by John Cameron in 1865, which is also the possible start date of when the image, I think, actually happened. I do think Leutemann sort of like consulted Cameron's description, which is a very detailed one. So I don't think Cameron, who was like an editor for the Straits Times, I don't think he was making it up. So that's my.
Well, for myself, in the essay that you mentioned, I didn't actually engage directly with this image. But I first got interested in the tiger because of an earlier project that I did in 2003, which was called Utama, Every Name in History is I. And that is a work about the founding of Singapore. So for those of you who are not familiar, Singapore or Singapura means lion city. Singa meaning lion, Pura meaning city in Sanskrit. So the story goes that Utama, a man called Sangnila Utama, arrived upon the shores of Singapore and spotted a lion upon our shores, and hence named our island Singapura. But of course, lions are nowhere to be found in the region, But what we had a lot of were tigers. So since 2003, I always wanted to do a project about tigers because they seem to be the alternative to the lion city, So I think the essay that you mentioned was the first time I sort of gathered my thoughts about tigers and my research. And I think it was a very nice coincidence with Kevin doing the essay on tigers as well. So I think these two essays were kind of a good fit.
And then later you came to the Leutemann image, I think, and then used that as a basis for like 10,000 tigers, 2 or 3 tigers, and then now 1 in several tigers. There are many things about the image that interested me, and still, kind of interests me. For instance, the fact that the tiger is like in midair, suspended, and I don't think that's for like dramatic purposes, just for dramatic purposes. The fact that the tiger seems to be attacking the theodolite rather than Coleman, and also the fact that the tiger is attacking from the front, which is not how tigers usually attack. They do it from the rear. So that's another kind of strange thing about this very strange image. There were a couple of things that occasioned my reading of the image as that the tiger was a weird tiger. And it's, I think, important that the image doesn't explicitly state that this was a kind of like reading or interpretation that I wanted to do. So, why the tiger emerged in 1835, right, rather than 1819, which seems kind of like strange, as though there was some disturbance that caused it to emerge. And then you take a look at capitalism as it was developing on the island, right? Gambia and pepper plantations. It seemed like around the 30s there was a kind of like threshold that was being reached as more and more territory was being opened up on the island, right? And so knowing that in the Southeast Asian region and Malayan region, there was like this phenomena of the were-tiger, that it was like shamanic, it was like a trickster figure, it operated on a boundary, it had this kind of protective function for communities, like, village people. It seemed to, that this image was this very, it was almost like too good, that this was not just a tiger, but a weird tiger. And it was responding to the encroachment of capitalism on the island, that occasion at sleep. So I didn't read it as this kind of, Coleman's getting attacked in a literal way. That there was more. It was much more like deeply allegorical, and I think you responded to that and later built up on it. Right?
Sure. Yeah. So just to on that thought, because I recreated this image in 3D graphics, So actually the hardest bit for us to get correct is actually the position of the tiger. So sometimes the animators that I was working with, they would move the tiger, they would orient the tiger a little bit too much towards the theodolite, and it loses the tension. Because I think what makes the image rich is that there is a slight bit of ambiguity, whether the tiger is going for the theodolite or for Coleman.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that little bit of ambiguity was really difficult to get correct with the 3D animators. So that's when you kind of really discover sort of the magic of the two-dimensional prints, that these kind of ambiguities could exist here, and it's much more difficult in a 3D space to reproduce. Yeah.
And then Leutemann seems to be very intentional about positioning the tiger such that it seems to be leaping into our space as well, like engaging the viewer, So that's another thing.
Yeah, so that actually what you just mentioned is the trickiest bit to get right, which is the orientation of the tiger. Because if you look at it carefully, it's actually not headed towards Coleman, but slightly diagonal towards us. Yeah. So for myself, the figure of the tiger was always a fascinating one, because for me, I associate it actually with ambiguity. So you mentioned the tiger had a protective function, which is definitely true. But if we think of the tiger in the Malayan world or the Southeast Asian world, It is very often associated with ancestral spirits. And ancestral spirits are protective, but they could also be punitive. They could also be punished. They are there to hand out punishments if you break any taboos. So I think, between the protector and the punisher, there is this kind of like ambiguity. And I think, together I started to project that into this image as well, because of the suspension of the tiger kind of in midair. I think it allows for these kinds of projections of ambiguity and yeah.
And that's also anthropologist Robert Wessing's book, right? The Soul of Ambiguity, which is about tigers, and including were-tigers. Yeah. One thing I was interested in doing in my essay was arguing not in a kind of like simply metaphorical way or doing a metaphorical reading of a tiger. And I ended up arguing that this was about kind of that pre-political space of intensity between the human and animal. Or another way of saying that is that the split between human and animal, or the human and animal realms, that's like the political, right? So more than a metaphorical reading, I think I was trying to reach for this kind of constitutive dimension of the tiger in human and social relations in Southeast Asia. Do you think, like, especially your tiger works, right, pick up on that, the constitutive dimension?
Could you elaborate a little bit on the constitutive dimension, like what you mean?
So you can think of this in like a Deleuzian way as well. Like there's the side of Deleuze that's like, about rhizomes and like networks. But then there's another side of Deleuze, right? Which is like his difference in repetition, which is all about like genesis and constitution, right? I think of like your tiger works as kind of like engaging with like this deeper realm, that it's about like the formation of like subjects or even the formation of like societies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, after you phrase it as such, yeah, it's definitely something I think a lot about. I think the motif of the tiger is especially rich as a way to think this sort of origins and beginnings and ontologies. I think, yeah. In tigers first arrived like in the Malayan world, probably like more than a million years ago, and Homo sapiens emerged sort of 10,000 years ago. So tigers were always there when the first humans kind of like arrived. Right. So I think that led to this kind of belief, I think, of the first inhabitants in Southeast Asia regarding the tiger as a sort of ancestral figure. So I think this all adds to the richness of the tiger as a kind of a motif in thinking historically, but I think also almost ontologically, because sometimes I think about, when the first humans arrived in Southeast Asia, they chose to live in the region between the waters and the forest, which is actually the favored place for tigers. So tigers always, tigers don't actually live in the forest as we think. They live on the edges or the outskirts of forests where you have mammals of enough biomass to sustain them. So that zone is where the first humans also lived. And I think this kind of close proximity between humans and tigers lead to a very special kind of like I imagine that it leads to a certain development of a certain kind of sensorium. You sense the tiger, you develop certain modes of behavior in these areas to cope with the presence of the tiger. But it also leads to the growth of these kinds of systems of symbols as well.
Here, by the way, is Coleman's map that came out of his various trips into the island. So despite the tiger attack, he, survived and produced this. Another way of phrasing my point that, your works, I think, are engaging with like the tiger in more than a metaphorical way. It's almost like there's a kind of a realness behind or beneath the metaphor, I think. That is something kind of like you're probing. Another moment that you're interested in is in this 1950s, 60s moment of Malayan communism. And I can't help but think of that very famous Lee Kuan Yew quote where he says, we had to ride the tiger of Malayan communism. Now the topic is like very kind of like intricate, and it goes even into social banditry. It definitely is about like the kind of very strange, bizarre politics that happened during this, and very unresolved that happened during this period. But I think like with banditry, for example, it helps kind of ground that metaphor. The historian Chia Boon King talks a lot about and has written about very well of, for instance, bandits that were operating on the border between Kedah and Siam in like the early part of the 20th century. How these bandits were supported by these local communities. Like they had the social function. How these bandits had like a magical aura, and they were like invulnerable to like bullets and blades. And so when in your work you use like the tiger in this moment, for example in your 10,000 Tigers, it's like there's more than a metaphor going on, I think. One example is this is like a ballad of one of these social bandits named Nyen, who's considered the Robin Hood of Malaya. And in the second line, his image was fierce and savage, like a tiger. So I'm kind of like trying to probe this dimension that's like more than just like the metaphorical, which you were saying it's like more ontological, right?
Yeah, I think rather than thinking that it's more than metaphorical, I would think that for me, the metaphor is real.
Right.
Like the metaphor itself is concrete, So that's the way I tend to think with the tiger as a metaphor. Yeah. So for example, tigers in Singapore basically got exterminated during the colonial period, But after their physical annihilation, tigers returned incessantly as metaphors, So you mentioned this period of Malay communism. Very often the epithets of the tiger is used to describe the communists. And what you have just described with the social banditry, them being sort of liminal figures and sort of half hidden in forested areas, all these sort of lent the communists to the epithets of the tiger.
Right.
Yeah. So, we can think of, I guess, the other moment when this tiger metaphor was used a lot was probably during the Second World War with the Japanese 25th Army. They were often described as tigers as well. So maybe just to give a bit of context to the images that we are looking at, all these images come from a theatrical performance that I produced in 2014, called 10,000 Tigers. Yeah. So 10,000 tigers, and one or several tigers which we have in the exhibition, they kind of engage with very similar areas of histories in Singapore and Malaysia. Yeah. So I shouldn't probably talk too much about 10,000 tigers, right?
You want to go into Yamashita?
Yeah. So like, I'll just jump to one of the characters in the play, which is this figure, which is a Japanese soldier. So the Japanese soldier here sort of embodied for me the Japanese moment of the were-tiger narrative. The leader of the 25th Japanese army was General Tomoyoki Yamashita. His nickname was the Tiger of Malaya. And if we looked at how the British were defeated by the Japanese soldiers, it was mainly in the forest where the British had lost. The Japanese were able to move very swiftly through the forest. They were ambiguous, you know. They were known to be very cunning and savage to the British soldiers. But all of these qualities were the same qualities that the British projected upon tigers, you know, amphibious, cunning, savage, you know. So I think there is something more to the metaphor, you know, so there is something concrete in the metaphor. And I think metaphor means vehicle or to transport, right? So a metaphor is to transport. And if I think about the tiger in the Malayan cosmology, its role was that of a vehicle to transport ancestral spirits, you know. So the tiger in its, you know, the metaphor and the medium is concrete for me.
Great. And then another very famous one of these like bandit type figures was Lytik, right, which became part of the work, The Nameless, which I'll not elaborate on only for reasons of time, but he's such a fascinating figure in like this history. Anyway, one of the elements in 10,000 Tigers was these two individuals, and they were based off of this photo that William Skeet had in his book, The Pagan Races of the Malay Peninsula. This photo of what appears to be a were-tiger, who's the guy on the right. And it's very interesting that Skeet's caption, right, says that it's like the guy on the right, not the guy on the left. What fascinates you about this image, which you've returned to a number of times?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a photograph of a were-tiger, who wouldn't be fascinated, you know, with such a photograph? But there's many things with the image that attracts me, you know. I mean, just even in the physical composition. I mean, for one thing, the two figures look extremely uncomfortable. You know, they seem to be squatting in a rather precarious position. Their bodies seem to be unnaturally sort of upright. You know, there is a kind of direct confrontation, I think, with the camera, such that like you feel their kind of nerves. You know, they are sort of just everything is kind of like heightened. What you know, intrigued me a lot as well was this question of why there were two figures rather than one, you know. And then I started thinking that a were-tiger is already more than one, because he could be a two in one, you know, or one that is a two. And so now we have a were-tiger who's accompanied by a man, you know. So there is something sort of uncountable in it, and hence, which really explains the titles of like all my tiger works, such as 10,000 tigers, or 2 or 3 tigers, or 1 or several tigers. I think this kind of like uncountability is what you know, drew me into this this one single image.
It might also have to do like the counting, right? It may relate to your interest in naming as well.
Yeah.
But maybe we shouldn't go into that.
Yeah. Sure.
You want to talk about this
Yeah, I think
buffalo skin problem?
Yeah, sure. I think you know, now that as I look at this, I just wanted to show this image because yeah, over here we kind of have a classic confrontation, I think, of the tiger and the buffalo, you know. So this is actually a fan that is used at the beginning of shadow puppet theater. So if you have ever seen a shadow puppet theater performance, before it begins, the screen is filled with two of these large fans. And these fans are shaped as leaves, and but within the leaf is an entire cosmology or entire kind of like narrative. So I think it's a beautiful and poetic symbol that the whole could be embodied in the small. Within a leaf, you kind of have the whole tree. So it's a tree of life puppet, which is a leaf. Yeah. And in it, we have the classic confrontation of tiger and buffalo. But what makes it even more interesting is that this puppet itself is made out of buffalo skin. So you have a representation of a buffalo on a support, which is buffalo skin. And even more interesting for me is that you also have a tiger on it. So the tiger and buffaloes are usually antithesis. They are antithetical to each other. So there are fights between buffaloes and tigers have been sort of ritually staged in the 17th century in Javanese courts. But you have a tiger that is made out of the skin of its enemy, So this particular image has always intrigued me a lot, which I guess leads to, maybe you can see the next image, maybe the next one, yeah. So this is a set of the puppets that I made in Yogyakarta with a traditional puppet maker. So we basically created this set of puppets out of the image by Leutermann. And that there is also something there which interested me, because that image is, obviously in the Western tradition of representation, But here we have buffalo skin, which used as shadow puppetry, which is sort of a medium of kind of a Southeast Asian medium of projection and of image making. So
you worked with somebody in
Yogyakarta.
Yogyakarta
to create this, yeah. So here what we have is, I guess, a combination of these two very different kind of representational techniques and histories sort of folded into one image, which for me has something to do with skin and reversibility, which in turn, I guess, leads somehow to the uncountability that I mentioned earlier, Just this kind of indistinction or ambiguity somehow.
And this is from 10,000 Tigers, right?
Yeah, this is from 10,000 Tigers, but it also appears in one or several tigers in a slightly altered form.
Right.
Yeah. So here we project the original image onto the puppets. So puppets are usually used behind the screen to create images, but here we use the puppet itself as a screen, as a support. So this is an image actually of a very typical tiger and buffalo fight that was staged. I think on the far right corner, we see European colonialists at the side. So what is really interesting was that the meanings of the tiger and the buffaloes constantly shifted across history. The buffalo we associate with like very solid values of civilization, and the tiger is, for the peasant, the tiger represented untamed nature, wild, savage nature. But during the colonial period, everyone was rooting for the buffalo because the colonialist was seen pretty much as the tiger. Yeah.
I'm amazed by that earlier image as to how orderly the crowd is placed. I don't think it happens that way in Southeast Asia usually.
Yeah. When Southeast Asia gets depicted in that period, it becomes a lot more orderly than it usually is, I think.
And a theme that also gets picked up in one or several tigers is this notion of like a confrontation between like these two figures, right? And then in one or several tigers, the viewer is like between these two screens and is literally placed between these two positions. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, so actually the viewer is in the position of the theodolite. Yeah. So we are sort of caught in between these two forces, and we are choose to follow one screen or the other screen. It's impossible to see both at the same time. So I think I wanted to create this opposition in order to create this bit of a zone of uncertainty for the spectator, that they are never completely sure of what is happening at any one time. But I think there is also something within this confrontation of a tiger and a native, or tiger and a colonialist. This is kind of a classic iconography. I think we see a lot of these types of images during the colonial period, like especially from like India. I think we have a lot of images of tigers leaping up at white men on elephants. So I think that there is something very specific in this image that we've been talking about, but at the same time it belongs to a genre.
Definitely, there's a history of representation of animals, like in Europe too, and relating to like aristocratic animal hunts and all that. It comes from that kind of tradition.
Yeah.
There's one thing I observed just now when I was watching and experiencing the work outside. It's a phrase, an expression that recurs twice. At least I counted it twice, maybe it recurs more, which is when Coleman is speaking almost, and the being we see in the previous slide, tropical hell, at least twice, maybe more, can correct me with that regard. And it's almost felt like Coleman does not really enjoy the encroachment. He's not there. He's not, modernity is not a fun project for him. I don't know, why use that phrase?
Or wasn't it a lot of Europeans felt like the tropics was literally hell because of the weather and all that, right?
Yeah, but I'm just curious as to why Nyen would evoke it multiple times in the work.
I think the full phrase of it is in this seasonless tropical hell,
yes.
Time stands still. Yeah, but that's probably just how I feel in our weather back in Singapore. But I think when it's like, joking aside, I think in the slow, hot, humid afternoon in Singapore, time to me stands still. Things become very slow, and I could imagine that image of the road survey interrupted, where things are kind of floating in mid-air and they get into slow motion, and we as the audience are in between the tiger and Coleman, and this slowing down of time enables us to look at the image more carefully, to unpack like different kinds of narratives out of this encounter. So hence that moment was always kind of repeated in the work. Yeah.
Or it's hell repetition.
Yeah, hell is repetition. Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's the last three slides that we saw. We saw a tiger. We saw Coleman, then we saw a tiger, and then we see a were-tiger. So even these two screens, even though they are facing each other and in opposition, but I think the interesting thing for me was also to try to build in a little bit of circulation or ambiguity between these opposites, So, but I think trying to think of that something which escapes this kind of binary confrontation was also eventually what led me to the rest of the image, which is basically the Indian convicts in the picture. So maybe we can shoot.
Well, before we get to that, I'm interested in one or several tigers, right? At the kind of possibilities that moving to CGI animation provided for you. Maybe you can explain for us this notion that you have of the body being a kind of shell. And to me, when I hear of that, I think of the films of Robert Bresson, especially like Pickpocket, where the actors are almost these like hollow shells, just acting out like the parts. And I know Bresson is pretty big for you. Could you speak more about this?
So this project was the first time I worked with animation, with 3D graphics. So before this, I usually made films with human actors. And my preference have always been with amateur actors who have no acting skills, and usually for me, acting means really acting like, as in, doing something rather than performing in a drama. So it's that sense that I get from Bresson, where the figures are almost shells in which something passes through, in which the script passes through, in which Bresson's wheel passes through.
Or they're like vessels.
They are like vessels for something else. So I think for me, when I first worked with animation, it was actually very almost natural for me, because when you work with 3D graphics, you literally work with a shell. Yeah. So these figures that we have seen, they are all built as empty shells, and the motions that animate them were captured through motion capture processes, with a human actor. So the actor that I worked with was actually the singer. So he was singing and moving at the same time as both the tiger and Coleman. So actually, what we think are opposites, actually they came from the same source. And just an additional anecdotal sort of like information, the singer-performer that I worked with, he's called Vindicatrix, and he's based in London. And when I started working with him on the project, I found out that he was actually half Malay. So his mother was Malay and his dad was English. So he was basically Coleman and the were-tiger in one,
Nice.
Yeah. So, going back to the 3D animation, so what we literally are working with is a shell that is animated by motions that are external to it. And this has been a constant source of fascination for me in working with animation.
Very much like puppetry also, right?
Yeah. It is very close to puppetry, I think. It's, it's puppetry and acting at the same time. Yeah.
One of the effects of this, when you're looking at the video, right, is that you don't seem to respond to the tiger and Coleman in a kind of psychological way, or like you don't seem to respond to them on an emotional register. And there's also that strange and disturbing feeling that, you're looking at something that's like a human, but then not really a human. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, what you just described, in the field of animation, there is a well-known term for that. It's called the uncanny valley. It's basically that when people are doing 3D animation of humans, there is a kind of a curve of how realistic you could get. If it's super unrealistic, you actually are very comfortable with it because you just think of it as a cartoon. If it's very realistic but not realistic enough, that's when you drop into the uncanny valley, and these images look strange to you because they are human and not human.
And then there's also this moment of repulsion, right?
Yeah.
That you get.
Yeah, I think it's a repulsion. It's like something to do with our ambiguous feeling towards something which is animate and inanimate at the same time, So those were, I was very much aware that these were like kind of our human sort of responses to CGI.
I was thinking that the figures and our response to the video, it's not operating on like a emotional or even like a conscious register, that these are meant to like strike deep into the sensorium or like directly into the sensorium. And I was also thinking about like Deleuze's notion of like a diagram, right? That this is the kind of like level that the video is like operating on, like striking at the unconscious.
Yeah. I think the diagrammatics, I mean, for me, it has always been a kind of important way of mapping out works. Right. Yeah. So I think this kind of going direct into intensities, as well, I think it's kind of a good description for me of like the way I stage my dramas. So they are not psychological or not narrative in our, the normal definition of the word, but rather they represent, or rather they embody forces.
Right.
So this crossover that happens often between theater, I suppose, in some ways, film, and even the installative. I mean, this is quite interesting. You sort of move between zones, occupy them as and when you please. And one of the key elements that somehow seems to connect them, for me, is the script itself that you author. And this script is very heavily researched in many ways. Can you just talk a little bit more about this process?
Sure. Yeah, so this research has been ongoing since the year we published the essay, which was 2007. Yeah. So I mean, so it's...
Anniversary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 10 years anniversary. Yeah. So, I mean, the script for me is... one interesting way to think about the script is that basically I tried to create a tiger and a coalman which is singing about themselves. So I have a script, but I tried to kind of insert the script fully into these two figures. So the script is sung really as a duet between these two figures. Yeah. So and I think what we will probably experience with one or several tigers, or actually any of the tiger works that I've done, is that the narratives and the histories are so dense that I'm not sure if it's something that a spectator could understand immediately upon watching, So what I'm trying to say is that, like, for me, inserting the script into these works, I often think of it actually like a dream, I mean, we can compress the script into the performance, but maybe in a Freudian sense, we could also say that it's about condensing, this into a dream. Yeah. So for me, my works like 10,000 Tigers or one or several tigers are like these highly condensed crystals, or dreams out of this research.
Getting back to the figure of the Indian convict, which you picked up in the Leuterman image, the Indian convict also, I think, comes back in our moment as like the figure of a migrant worker, and that figure also seems to represent this kind of like abject, like it's like the abject figure of modernity, right? Singaporean modernity. Can you speak more about the Indian convict?
Sure. So, I mean, I first started thinking about the Indian convicts in the image as a way to get out of the binary of the tiger and the white surveyor, and just to look at what was around, the image. So I think different scholars have mentioned that these were Indian convicts, But then I decided to really try to research on the history of sort of the penal colony history of Singapore. So Singapore was actually one of the most advanced penal colonies, like in Southeast Asia. So the British started this system of transportation, actually the sentence of transportation, which is when felons, convicted felons are sentenced to transportation. It means that they'll be sent to a prison outside of India, where they would usually serve in some other parts of the Straits settlements as cheap labor, essentially, building public buildings. you know. So I just got increasingly sort of fascinated with these figures and trying to think what is their place in the image, you know. This image which is so structured as a opposition, like a clash between the white surveyor and the Malayan tiger. What role do they play, you know, these 8 figures who were sort of suspended as well in the air in the midst of falling. Yeah. So I started really, you know, researching onto these histories, and it got me thinking as well that in some sense, Singapore today perhaps is not all that different. You know, so if you think of Singapore, maybe just to backtrack a little bit, Coleman, George Dromgold Coleman, who's the surveyor, he was the superintendent of public works in Singapore, but he was also the superintendent of prisoners in Singapore. And in fact, in the British colonial system, these 2 roles, whoever was in charge of public works was always in charge of prisoners, because it was basically the prisoners who built all the public works. You know, so it seemed to be a very efficient kind of task organization. Yeah. So you know. Yeah.
Just to add to that, one of the lesser known Coleman buildings is in Perak, in the northern part of Malaysia, where he would go on to design 2 adjacent buildings. One was a museum, a natural history museum and an ethnography museum, still exists today. And next to it was the prison. And when you look at both of them, they look very similar.
Yeah.
Of course, probably built by much of the convict labor.
Yeah.
And then later on, Coleman's successor, McNair, right, writes this book, Prisoners and Their Own Wardens, which is all about self-surveillance, right? Which is basically what Singapore is about.
Yeah. This was really, this is the memoir of one of the, like Kevin mentioned, yeah, Prisoners, Their Own Wardens is a beautiful summary of the philosophy, which is basically that prisoners were encouraged to survey upon their own fellow prisoners, and whoever is well-behaved gets promoted into becoming supervisors. You know, so it's an entirely self-regulatory system, yeah. And all the workers all the prisoners, of course, become workers in such a system. So the early prisons in Singapore were also very much organized like dormitories rather than like prisons.
Right. Doesn't this come out of Benthamian social philosophy? You know, that whole panopticon moment. Yeah. It comes out of this, right, matrix, right?
Yeah, I think very much so, yeah. So you mentioned earlier that this is kind of like Singapore today, you know. So this was also my fascination with this theme of the prison as a model,
right?
You know, and the workers, and this indistinction between prisoners and workers, you know, who are self-regulatory and efficient, yeah. And of course, Singapore today is still built by Indian migrant workers, you know, who have very low income and have some restrictions in their rights. Their passports are withheld, you know. So you know.
So when you know, it brings us back to the Leutemann image, which to me is this like earth scene of Singaporean modernity, right?
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for putting that as the image in the first gallery of the Singapore collection at the National Gallery of Singapore, rather than some, you know, boring landscape painting. Yeah. And then it's very poignant when, as one of the scenes in your video, right, these migrant workers look at that Leutemann image. Yeah.
So with the work, I engaged 8 Indian migrant workers currently working in Singapore to be actors, you know, in the project. So we basically did like 3D scans of them, and we also brought them to the museum to have a, you know, look at the image, and we filmed them looking at the image. So and also it was interesting to have conversations with them about this segment of history, you know. Yeah, so I think it was a nice experience for them. Of course, these migrant workers would never visit the National Gallery otherwise. And the National Gallery, coincidentally, one of the most popular entrance into the National Gallery is through Coleman Street. So named after George
No.
Dromgold Coleman. Yeah.
I think we should end there. But thanks.
Yeah, thank you.